Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money in the home as a team. Today we welcome Dustin Voss. Dustin is the financial education specialist for Chicago Public Schools, where it is his job to make sure all of Chicago's children gain a foundation in financial literacy. Dustin has been a longtime advocate and teacher of financial literacy, including serving on the Illinois Governor's Task Force for Financial Empowerment and being on the oversight board for Chicago Public Schools 403B and 457 program. Dustin and his wife Nora are an educator couple navigating the joys and difficulties of raising a family and caring for a dependent elder. On today's episode, Dustin shares how his young family has navigated the high costs of childcare and home buying in one of the nation's most expensive cities, and how they work together as a team in their marriage. Enjoy the show.
Welcome, Dustin. Nice to see you on the podcast. Can you tell us about your career and your partner's career and the background behind, your profession?
Sure. So I am the financial education specialist for Chicago Public Schools. So I work in our central office and I make sure that kids get high quality financial literacy instruction across the curriculum and outside the regular school day. Support all that work. I've been in my role since August of 2020, and the previous 13 years, I had been a classroom teacher in high school, teaching civics and personal finance mostly, among a few other social science courses. So my background and my training is in teaching. My spouse, Nora, she went through an alternative cert program through AUSL to become a teacher and has been a teacher for 13 years now. So she started her career just a few years after mine. Didn't go through the typical undergraduate route, went through an alternative cert program, and is teaching in the neighborhood where she grew up.
Obviously you're doing very great work. It's definitely needed. Providing, personal finance education, making sure students are receiving this at an early age and all through their education. But going back to your partner, how did you guys meet?
We were set up by mutual friends. To sound real old-fashioned, but yeah,
old-fashioned style.
I
think that can be one of the best ways still.
Yep. So I met Nora in a bar at around 1:30 in the morning. Talked to her for about 3 minutes before I decided I'd ask her out on a date, and so far just love her more and more ever since that time, about 13 years ago.
That's awesome. Also, I hit the ball a little bit earlier, Dustin. I've been admiring your work in Chicago Public Schools for years. And in fact, much of the work that we're doing with large school districts around the country, it's modeled after what you're doing. So thank you for making an impact on your community, on students in Chicago, and then on students around the country. You might not know that, but it's truly inspiring. Speaking of making, a bigger and bigger impact on the world. So you have an almost 3-year-old kid. Interested to hear how you and Nora managed your careers, since the birth of your baby.
It's a great question, Christian. I am in the central office position I am now because of Sula, our kid. So I had been pretty much headhunted to come and work in central office where I am for years when I finally accepted. And I accepted because now one of us doesn't have to write subplans if we miss work. And for people that birth children in our district, thank God it's changed now. The new mayor has changed the parental leave policy, but forever, folks that had children couldn't recover their sick days and benefit days for up to like 4 or 5 years. So that this year, almost every day, my spouse has had to take off. She has to take a no pay day. And that's because of 3 years ago, right? It used to be you drain pretty much all your benefit days. And then you got an infant who's sick all the time. So you use all the little bit they give you every year up right away. So thankfully we're out of that now. Like I said, Chicago's a bit different. I don't know any other major city that had a community organizer and former teacher with less money make it to the 5th floor to become mayor. But that's what we got here in Chicago. And he's now all parents get 12 weeks of parental leave, and those even skip over breaks. So you can take your 2 weeks in June and then take 10 more weeks in September if it's over the summer.
Can you share the specifics of parental leave? Are you saying that it's leave that you can take? So you would have, you said 12 weeks, and then Nora also has 12 weeks. Is that true?
Yeah, but then additionally, the birthing parent has access to FMLA as well. So there's an and protected leave as well. So the birthing parent can take even more time off. I will say this program also applies to adopting parents as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So wow, talk about a system set up to help parents be successful, because we know through research now the power of men in particular taking parental leave, as historically they don't connect with their children, their infants, as much as historically women have, because they have to go back to work like right away, right? Because they don't have any leave. But not only does parental leave help support the bonds that fathers create with their children that last a lifetime, but it also allows women to continue to work. They don't have to step away and take a more quote flexible job, which you've done for her, or sacrifice their careers. It's almost like you have multiple pieces to the puzzle now that you can work to put the puzzle together for both of your careers, rather than more of a traditional structure. That's really great to hear.
Yeah, I'm really proud of it for our district, because you're right. When Sula was born, I had 10 days. That was it. That was the paternal leave was 10 days. That was it.
10 days.
Yeah.
And that's not enough. That's not enough, Tom, to get everything ready, get into the flow of things, help and connect with your newborn.
Yeah, and our first one wasn't one of those easy ones that sleeps 7 to 7. Nuh-uh. It took her about 11 months to sleep through the night.
Oh, you can barely even help the kid with their FAFSA application, in 10 days.
Yeah,
especially not this
and even
year,
then, the FAFSA will screw it up.
Especially not this year.
I know.
Hey,
and I mean, you got to set
shout
up
out to all the
29
school counselors.
Yeah. Having
Yeah.
a 750 student caseload and
this year,
playing. Yeah, it's really hard.
Counselors earning every penny and then some this year.
You're not kidding.
Well, speaking of FAFSA and your expertise and background in personal finance, but now that you have this perspective as being a parent as well, how has becoming a parent impacted your approach to personal finance and financial literacy education?
To personal finance, I can say the budget's tighter, right? We got daycare, and that ain't cheap.
Yeah. Nope.
And we became parents at the same time we ended up having an elderly dependent move in with us. So we are also taking care of my spouse's mother. she's great. She actually still does a little real estate work. So we're only mostly taking care of her. But, it basically, everything I'd been teaching students, and even going back to some of the things I did for myself when I got out of college and didn't have a teaching job, I was working in the service industry. Some of those budgeting techniques I had to become more serious about. So I'm still a person that uses a tiny notebook and writes down every dollar that we spend,
Love it.
so that we can reflect on that and talk about where our money goes. And that specifically helps us because we both have side hustles. My spouse sells vintage clothing at open air markets and sometimes in pop-up stores on the weekends. And that's a LLC, a full business that she runs. And I also can drive boats. I can charter boats, and I do that in Chicago, here on the Chicago River on a weekend here and there for a little extra money. So we don't quite have 100% predictable income. Same with my wife now. If she takes a day off, it's a no payday. So her check fluctuates. So I think that's one of the things I've thought about in training teachers is so much of the budgeting student facing curricula out there is based on a 50-30-20 rule. And in my view, you're not hitting the kids the right part of life, right? 50-30-20 works when you have predictable income. Well, teenagers and fewer adults have that. So I think that a better form, or at least what's worked for me, is using what some call a cash flow budget to be able to look back and reflect on, hey, are my dollars being spent according to my values and my vision for the future? And that's kind of what the conversations with my spouse are more and more about. What are our values? What are our visions for the future? And how can we align our money to be spent that way?
And teaching personal finance at the college level, I mean, I agree with that. The 50-30-20 doesn't really work when you're maybe just having a part-time job and your parents might be, or grandparents or loans are paying for, most of your expenses, if not all of your expenses. And so having that, I actually make them go through a cash flow kind of analysis and keep records of that, so they can really see how their money is being used, how it's being spent.
Yeah, 50-30-20 as a ratio, there's a lot of criticism of it lately in the context of housing, because that 50 is the housing component. And, there are some parts of the country, including where I live right now, where that's a dream, like being able to get your housing costs down to 50% of your monthly take-home pay.
Well, it's supposed to even include your basic groceries as well, right?
Yeah.
So, and I mean, especially, we're in Chicago. It's not a cheap city to live in either.
You know what? You make a good point. And, something I think becoming a parent has made me emphasize something that I've been saying is, in personal finance, it's the easiest place to get to is the blame game, right? And Brian, you probably saw this with students, right? You start to teach and then they can start to kind of become critical of their own parents, right? My parents are doing this. Yeah. I'm knowing better. But what I try to emphasize is forgiveness and empathy and understanding that most of us are just trying to do the best we can. Yeah. I did not want to hop out of a mortgage at 2% into a mortgage at 6%. But with two new folks in the household and my spouse starting a new business that required space for inventory, right? It made a lot of sense for us to move into a place with more space. So we did. And now, Christian, as you're pointing to, I got a much bigger mortgage payment every month than I used to.
Yeah. Well, and I talk like there's rarely enough money for everything. right?
Yeah.
So we have to make very hard decisions. And going back to your point, Dustin, I totally agree. Like, we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace and approach those decisions with that grace and forgiveness and just a recognition that we're doing the best we can.
Right. Yeah, and I believe that
For
people do the best they can with the information and opportunities they have around them. I see that everywhere. So the blame, we can get blame game out of personal finance, and while it's at it, wants and needs can go somewhere else too.
And yeah, for our listeners who aren't familiar with the 50-30-20 rule, it's essentially 50% on quote needs, however you want to define that, 30% on quote wants, however you want to define that, and 20% for saving and investing. And, as we've all been talking for the past few minutes, the challenge with that is that the cost of childcare, the cost of housing or whatever, I mean, it's all over the map, depending on where you live. It can be extraordinarily expensive depending on when you had your child or when you bought your home. And the challenge is like, really, how do you go about having, these types of conversations, particularly when your monthly income changes so much? We have a toolkit that we sell that is to start, strengthen, or rebuild marriages, that has lots of different topics that couples can dive into to fully understand how to address these types of challenges. And when we're in the midst now of building out even more topics, and one of them is monthly income changes. And what stuck out to me in doing the research, and this is in some state standards across the country now, is the fact that nearly 1 in 3 American households have a monthly income change of at least 25%. Right. So your income changes by 25%, a minimum, if you're in 1 of 3 American households. So this notion that like life is as simple as an Excel spreadsheet is absurd. Money is messy. Money is messy.
Oh, I thought we all lived in the set of Leave It to Beaver.
That's what Dave Ramsey would say.
Here in Chicago, Chicago public school teachers cannot select deferred pay. So that means they get all their money in 20 pay periods during the school year. That is a change that was made by a former mayor. If you ask him, it was to save on payroll expenses. If you ask most of us, it's to make teachers in more precarious situations in August when they might go on strike. But certainly, I see the damage it's done to many teachers, because teachers are just like most people, and most people struggle to consistently spend less than they earn or struggle to budget. And here we're back to the grace. And I used to say this to my students, shout out Alicia Brooks, who said, wait a minute, Voss, you're asking all of us to be extraordinary. If we're all extraordinary, aren't we ordinary again? You're right, Miss Brooks. That's right. I want you to all be different. You guys will be ordinary in this classroom, but extraordinary outside.
Can you share a couple more practical tips for budgeting and personal finance, when being a new parent and welcoming a new addition to your family?
Well, shout out the toolkit that I got a chance to look at. That toolkit is the type of thing, like, read it through, then keep it and go back to it to make selections for what you need when challenges arrive. I love that. For my spouse and I, it's been important just to keep communication open. And when communication gets hard, which it does, because we do have different relationships to money based on how we grew up. So that causes friction sometimes, but we don't stop talking. Like, neither of us will stonewall, right? We have methods to reconcile when we get into it. And we don't forget what we agree on, because there's some important things that we agree on, and we can go back to those things and move from there. Functionally, Gosh, it's easy to spend money on an infant and a baby. But and my tack was like, let's not buy anything, and my spouse's tack was more like, let's make sure she has everything she needs around her. So there was some friction there, but after a while we whittled down, and we'd agree on what we bought that was really worth it versus some things that maybe we didn't actually need to pay for.
Dustin, do you find that so we all have our own history with money, and I don't know if you've read the book by Dr. Rick, Spendthrifts and Tightwads. It's excellent. And it goes into the financial opposites that people can be. It's basically 10 to 20% of the population, meaning if you're a tightwad, not only are you frugal, but you actually hate to spend money. And if you're a spendthrift, your joy derives from constantly spending money. And the book is about how two people who are financial opposites can work together. And it's honestly an excellent book. Anyhow, what I have found is that those two opposites seem to be more extreme when it comes to spending on your children. So if you're at least the spending side, if you're a spendthrift, you really want to let go of the purse strings for your children. Have you found that to be the case in your relationship or others who have young children?
100%. Yes. And I do offer some personal financial consultations to teachers, and that's just like a word of mouth thing that I do. I don't even charge for that. I just help people. And I see it over and over again, and pets too. There's something psychologically going on when you spend money for somebody else that ain't you. You don't hate to see it go as much.
Yeah.
Well, I think when there's that strong emotional connection, that emotional bond, and you want to see those that you love happy and getting things that they want, like it, especially for those that are spendthrifts, it makes it a lot easier to spend.
Yeah,
I do this activity with a consumer skills course where I have the participants in the class categorize the different priorities that they're using to make a purchase across 3 different products. And so the priorities are things like quality, price, longevity, craftsmanship, brand, brand prestige. The first purchase is a used car. And so they align those different priorities for a used car. The second purchase is fresh vegetables. They align their priorities again. And the third purchase is a gift for a dear friend. And that's when you really start to see the priorities shift away from things like, longevity or things like very practical priorities, and more towards the more like emotionally resonant priorities. So they start to prioritize brand and craftsmanship higher for a gift for a dear friend, because there's an emotional connection there. And I imagine that emotional connection, a gift for a dear friend versus, a delicious dog bone for Fido, or, that adorable teething toy for your daughter, or whatever, I imagine it extends there too.
So this was not a setup. That when Destin had his child, the first thing I did was like, I'm gonna get that little baby a Justin Fields Chicago Bears onesie. And that's exactly what I did. It's not. I mean, it's a little practical. They need onesies, but I'm sure he's got 87 onesies. But I did get the 6 to 9 month version, thinking, well, everyone's gonna be dumping on the 0 to 6 month onesie. So I'll do the 6 to 9 month. It's interesting that you bring that up, Christian.
She looked great. And Christian, I don't know if your students would ever say it, but those are great gifts, right? I'm too much of a tightwad to to go and spend to buy from NFL shop Justin Fields onesies for my kid. So get it for me as a gift, because I'm too much of a tightwad. I'm not going to buy that. And I am on that tightwad. I like to ride my bicycle a lot. I'm waiting for a car seat or a trailer to pull. My budget is zero because it doesn't make sense to me that all these kids grow up everywhere and people can't use their car seats anymore. It should come to me for free. So I'm patient, and I believe this will happen.
You hear that, listeners? Dustin, I don't know if you want to give out your address, but I'm sure.
Well, there's lots of services like Facebook Marketplace now that has things for free. Like you can search by free and stuff too. You got to watch out for the scammers, but there are lots of sites now that are like, repurposing some of that, the used baby stuff, the used furniture, the used appliances that want to just help other families as well.
Well, and we're joking a little bit, but I would say, like, one thing we found as parents is just going back to our communities of parents, and we found support from everywhere, and that's been really lovely because folks with kids slightly older, folks with kids slightly younger, even at the daycare we send our Sula to, there's a sense that we can support one another and help one another when we're able to provide that kind of support. And that's a beautiful thing about parenthood, I think. So that would be something I want any new parents to know is ask for help. People are usually happy to help new parents.
As a Modern Husbands podcast listener, you recognize the importance of evidence-based advice from leading national experts for your marriage. That's why we know you will love our marriage toolkit. Nearly 50 national experts came together to provide bite-sized advice to manage the toughest topics couples face in managing money in the home as a team. Go to modernhusbands.com for your free preview of our marriage toolkit to start, strengthen, or rebuild your marriage. Once again, that's modernhusbands.com to sign up for your free preview of our marriage toolkit. Now back to the show.
You've talked a lot about like your budgeting and your personal finances as a parent. Let's take a step back, and what financial decisions did you and your partner make to prepare for parenthood?
Well, the big thing was me accepting this position, which when I accepted it was a pay cut compared to my income as a teacher, really, because now I work 12 months a year. I don't get those 10 weeks furloughed in the summer like most teachers do. So that was the big one. I would also point at our Illinois Bright Start 529 account. That same account was also used for me in graduate school, my wife in graduate school. So we just changed the beneficiary to my daughter when she was born. And I don't know how many people know that about Bright Start 529 or 529 accounts generally, whatever state you're in. Here in Illinois, our state-sponsored one's called Bright Start. But switching the beneficiary is really easy. So this is something I try to tell teachers, like, if you're going back to school, start it for yourself. If you ever plan on having a family, you can switch it easily. Now, one thing we've talked about is, we got the new house, we've got daycare fees. We don't have the same amount of money each month to save and invest. So what's going to take the haircut? Is it going to be our retirement, or is it going to be the kids' college savings account? And what we decided was we will mostly preserve our own retirement, and we will take windfalls. And whenever we get a windfall, we'll take half and we'll put in that 529 up to the $10,000 a year. And we've been following that so far, and it's worked out pretty good. So we can continue to save for retirement, but also we're making sure that our daughter has a little bit for college. But I'd say, sorry, go ahead.
Wait
Brian.
a second. So your income tax deduction in Illinois is up to 10 grand for the 529K?
State and federal. Yep.
That is really high. That's great. That if that's not the highest in the nation, I want to know who is, because I live in Georgia and I feel like Georgia's is pretty generous. It's at 8. Good for you. And you know what's nice is that you can now convert those into Roth IRAs, the 529Ks into Roth IRAs.
Yep, up to 35,000,
so that could be
I think.
a form of, yeah. Well, it has to be the income limit for that year. So what is that, like $7,000? So you can only do it 7,000 at a time. And then I didn't know there was a cap of what could be rolled over. Is that true?
Yeah.
Is that the case?
Yeah. Well, and my understanding is that essentially the feds changed the law so states can enact this, because I know our treasurer here in Illinois that's a big selling point, because a big obstacle for folks adopting these 529 plans is, what if my kid doesn't go to college? Even though you can use these to go to trade school, continuing education type programs, CDL, if you want to go that training. So
flight lessons.
Yeah, I always recommend them, especially here in Illinois, because the Bright Start is one of the better plans in the whole country. And we even have a program here where if you had a kid in 2023 or after, they'll give you $50 to start. And it works really cool because the $50 is basically held in trust for the kid for 18 years. So it's not like the parents can go in and take that money if things get desperate, which is always an issue with these types of programs. So I'm proud of our state and our state treasurer for what we're doing to support parents.
And just to clarify too, for that 529 plan rollover to the Roth IRA, there's the cap of 35,000, but it's per beneficiary, not per owner.
Right.
So if you have multiple kids, like if you want to roll that over to probably a spouse, or like, there are other options. It's not just 35,000 and you're done.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'll say I hear some other folks my age speaking about, worried about, oh my gosh, is the 529 account big enough for my kid? My preference is that my kid has some skin in the game. I don't mind if my kid has to pay for college or get loans. I'm probably projecting that was meaningful for me, right, when I was in college. But maybe our politics will get better and college will be free. We'll see. I don't know, but I don't think it's a bad
Dustin,
thing.
I'm on the other end of this. I have one in college. I have one who is a rising senior now. So we just made a trip to Western Michigan University, which is one of the best aviation programs in the nation. They just got a new fleet, which is now his top choice. And of course, Western Michigan, here's an example, that's $30,000 a year before lab fees in state, but it's only $32,000 out of state. So it's a bargain. But the lab fees are $90,000 for flight training. Okay, so then I have a third child who's also, and this adds up. Like when so like I want to stress to our listeners that investing now in a 529, and then we bought a duplex when I was young and sold it, and that's their college. Like, I cannot stress enough the importance of starting as young as you possibly can for this to compound, because the numbers get really big, particularly when you have multiple children. But anyhow,
well said.
It's also
Brian.
It's not something that we as individuals can control, like the political environments, the costs, the like exploding costs of college, the backdoor stuff going on with student loans and financial aid counselors on campus. If any financial aid counselors are out there and they're giving me side eye right now, well, I don't know, maybe clean up your act before you.
I love it, Christian.
Before you come for me. But anyway, like, we can't control any of that. What we can control is, what we are contributing to and investing in our children's, financial and educational futures. So control what you can control.
If we can't control it, we can at least be an advocate for the type of policies we believe are going to be best for ourselves and for our communities. So I don't like the whole suggestion we have no control. After all, this is a democratic republic. But I get what you're meaning, Christian. So you're hearing the civics teacher come out now.
Yeah, and I'm not advocating, by the way, for like becoming a mole and like burying your head in the sand either. But the locus of our control is focused on our own decisions, right?
And Brian's right. The power is start early, even if it's just $10 or $20. Start, because about 15 years from now, that's going to grow and grow and grow and grow.
Yep.
And it's nice to have, too, for subtle hints to relatives who want to contribute. Anyone can contribute to it. And one of the challenges I faced was that I hated all the trinkets the kids would get when they were 6 months old or a year old, because ultimately most of those gifts are about them, not about the kid. They just want to see that look of satisfaction in their eyes, like they're so happy. I made my kid happy. They could wrap up a rock. The kid doesn't matter. Any kid just loves busting out the wrapping paper. And but if you can somehow strong arm some relatives into like contributing $50 here, $100 there, that certainly helps the cause as well. And just the fact that it's open makes it easier, because now that's one less obstacle you have with your spouse and having the conversation of investing. So Dustin, we like to close out with one piece of simple and actionable advice that you might have for young families. So, couples who've just had a child, just based on our conversation today, other than start investing for college or any kind of alternative education, any kind of post-secondary education, because I think we beat that one to death. So again, what's one piece of simple and actionable advice you have for our listeners who have a child on the way or young children?
I would say start that financial journal. And I personally think that there's some magic when we put pen to paper. Something is happening in our brain. It's activating reflective parts of our brain to think about what we're doing. So literally journaling your spending, because, hey, I hope you will have a great 12-week parental leave program and you got 24 weeks between you and your spouse to be with your newborn child. But after that, childcare costs are going to hit. And those are going to be more, at least for me, they're close to a mortgage payment. They're more than my old mortgage was, that 2%. So, with that journaling, you can find out where can we find money, right? For us, like perhaps a lot of people, that pandemic hit. Wow, were we ever ordering things to the house, food and other things to the house? And that was just a lot of money leaving because, lockdowns, one of the joys we had was the great restaurants here in Chicago. So something we had to cut back on once we had the kids.
Yeah. Dustin, what a great conversation today. Thanks so much for joining us.
All right. Thanks, dads.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow modern husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.